A king once deliberately destroyed his own throne. This is the core of a true historical mystery, a story where absolute power chose absolute annihilation. By the end of this journey, you will understand the profound forces that could drive a ruler to such an unthinkable act. We will meet the monarch who held life and death in his hands, examine the shattered remains of his greatest symbol, and confront theories that range from political desperation to sacred madness. What kind of man shatters the very seat of his God-given authority? His name was King Anuradha, and his kingdom was the sun-baked, river-fed heart of Burma, known as Bagan. To stand in Bagan in the 11th century was to witness a civilization at its zenith, a sprawling empire of devotion and power where the lines between king and god were deliberately blurred. Anuradha was not merely a ruler, he was the axis upon which his world turned, a conqueror who unified the Irrawaddy Valley and a reformer who reshaped the spiritual landscape of Southeast Asia forever. His reign was a roaring engine of ambition, fueled by both military might and profound religious conviction. He did not just expand borders, he imported an entire new school of Buddhism, the Theravada Buddhism, building it into the very foundation of his state. Imagine a leader who is simultaneously a general, a head of state, and the chief architect of a national faith. That was Anuradha. Contemporary records, etched onto stone monuments called Kyoksa, praise his piety and his strength. To his people, he was a Dhammaraja, a righteous king whose power was legitimized by his protection of the Buddhist faith. To his rivals in the surrounding kingdoms, he was an unstoppable force, a man who commanded not just armies but the favor of the divine. And at the center of this divinely sanctioned power sat an object of unimaginable significance, the lion throne of Bagan. This was no ordinary chair. Crafted from sacred woods inlaid with gold and precious gems, it was a physical manifestation of the kingdom's soul. Its carvings were not mere decoration, they were a narrative in timber and metal, depicting the legendary origins of his dynasty and the cosmic order that placed Anuradha at its pinnacle. To sit upon it was to become the living link between heaven and earth, the human vessel for a mandate that was believed to be eternal. The throne was the ultimate seal of legitimacy, a contract made visible. It symbolized the king's vow to rule justly and the god's promise to grant prosperity. Its very presence in the palace audience hall commanded awe and absolute obedience. So we are left with a portrait of a supremely successful monarch, seated upon the ultimate symbol of his unquestioned authority, a man who had forged a golden age through will and devotion. This context makes his eventual act not just strange but utterly incomprehensible. Why would a king at the height of his power, revered as a near deity, ever raise a hand against the very object that certified his right to rule? The answer lies not in his triumphs, but in a shadow that began to fall across them. The throne did not fall to an invading army or crumble with age. It was dismantled by the king's own command. The location of this act is our first crucial clue. Historians and archaeologists, piecing together records from stone inscriptions and later chronicles, believe the throne was housed in the palace's primary audience hall. This was the very heart of royal power, a space designed to overwhelm visitors with its grandeur and to reinforce the divine nature of kingship. It was a public stage, but the act itself seems to have been anything but a spectacle. There are no accounts of a gathered court watching in horror. Instead, the evidence suggests a deliberate, almost private ceremony of deconstruction. Imagine the vast hall, normally echoing with the murmurs of officials and the rustle of silk, now silent but for the sound of purposeful work. This was not a frenzied attack. The fragments tell a story of careful, almost reverential destruction. Workers, likely under direct and solemn orders, used tools not of war but of craft, chisels and mallets, to systematically take the throne apart. The gold leaf was not looted, the precious gems were not pried out for treasure. Instead, the carved wooden panels depicting the royal lineage and cosmic symbols were separated. Many of these fragments were later discovered in a startling context, not discarded as trash but respectfully interred within the foundations of a new major religious structure, a stupa. This changes everything. Finding the pieces used as sacred foundation deposits transforms the act from one of vandalism into one of ritual. The tool marks on the wood are clean, precise breaks, not the haphazard splintering of a violent outburst. Even more telling, specific iconography. Particularly the lion motifs that symbolize the king's fierce protective power show signs of being intentionally defaced or removed before burial. This was a targeted silencing of the throne's symbolic voice, so we are not looking at an act of rage, but at a calculated symbolic transition. The king was not destroying his power, he was transferring it. The throne, as a vessel of worldly authority, was being decommissioned and its essence offered up to a higher purpose. This forensic detail points us toward a motive far more complex than madness or political desperation. It suggests a profound theological statement, a king who chose to crush his throne not because he lost faith in his reign, but because he found a deeper faith in something beyond it. The silence in that audience hall after the throne was taken apart echoes with a single haunting question: why, with the physical evidence laid out, the true investigation begins, moving from forensics to motive. Historians have proposed three primary theories, each a different key trying to unlock the same mysterious door. The first is the political theory. Could this have been an act of dynastic drama? Imagine a succession crisis looming, a king, perhaps without a clear heir or facing a powerful rival within his own family, might see the throne not as a seat of power, but as a prize for a usurper. By destroying it himself, he would be performing the ultimate power move, ensuring no one else could ever legitimately claim his authority. It would be a final, defiant statement, like a captain scuttling his own ship so the enemy cannot capture it. Yet the evidence from Anurada's reign complicates this. His rule was remarkably stable and long, and records point to a clear succession. There was no obvious rival waiting in the wings. This act feels less like a desperate defensive move and more like a deliberate, controlled choice made from a position of strength, not weakness. This leads us to the second, and perhaps most compelling, theory, the religious or ritualistic one. Remember where the fragments were found, buried within the foundations of a new stupa. In the Theravada Buddhist world that Anurada championed, the most meritorious act a person, especially a king, could perform was to build and dedicate religious monuments. The throne, for all its glory, was a symbol of worldly, temporal power, which Buddhist philosophy teaches is ultimately illusory and a source of attachment. By ritually deconstructing it and using its sacred materials to literally support a spiritual monument, Anurada could have been making the ultimate statement of piety. He was transferring the kingdom's power, its very soul, from the transient political realm to the eternal spiritual one. It was not destruction, but a profound act of consecration. Think of it as a king trading his crown for a monk's robes, but on a national scale. The careful, reverent deconstruction supports this, as does the defacing of the lion's symbols, which represented royal ferocity, a quality perhaps seen as incompatible with the peaceful foundation of a temple. This theory transforms the act from a mystery into a masterpiece of theological symbolism. Then there is the third lens, the psychological or personal theory. Could a deep personal crisis have triggered this, a devastating loss, a sudden illness, or a profound philosophical awakening that made him see the throne as a gilded cage? Perhaps after decades of absolute rule, he experienced a crisis of conscience, a feeling that the weight of the crown was a spiritual burden. The historical records, however, are silent on any personal breakdown. They portray a ruler of consistent vision and action until the end. While we cannot rule out a private despair, the sheer logistical and ritual precision of the throne's dismantling suggests a planned state act, not a personal meltdown. A king in the grip of madness would not likely order the fragments to be ceremoniously buried in a holy site. He might simply have had them burned. So where does the balance of evidence point? The political theory feels too small, too reactive for a king of Anurada's stature. The personal theory, while humanly relatable, lacks any anchor in the records. The ritualistic theory, however, fits the evidence like a key in a lock. It aligns with his lifelong devotion to Buddhist reform. It explains the careful method and the final resting place of the fragments, and it elevates the act from a bizarre historical footnote to a deliberate, monumental statement of faith. It suggests King Anurada did not crush his throne in anger or fear, but in an act of supreme, calculated devotion, choosing the eternal over the earthly. But to understand the full weight of that choice, we must see what happened after the throne was gone. The kingdom did not fall. This is perhaps the most startling fact of all. In the immediate wake of the Lion Throne's deconstruction, Bagan did not descend into anarchy or civil war. The administrative machinery, the tax collectors, the judges, the army commanders, all continued their work. Life in the bustling markets and the serene monasteries carried on. From a purely practical standpoint, the government proved it could function without its central physical icon. But a vacuum of that magnitude does not remain empty for long. The archaeological record suggests a fascinating shift. No new throne of comparable grandeur was ever built to replace the old one. Instead, the focus of royal power and public ceremony seems to have migrated. The king's authority became increasingly tied to the religious monuments he sponsored. The grand stupas and temples, many of which were still under construction, became the new stages for kingship. Royal proclamations might be made from the steps of a pagoda, and the king's presence was most powerfully felt not in a palace hall, but in the shadow of a spire reaching toward the heavens. The seat of power became quite literally a seat of enlightenment. This was a profound transformation of political theater. The king was now performing his role as Dharmaraja, the righteous king, more explicitly than ever before, with the spiritual infrastructure of the kingdom itself serving as his new throne room. How was Anuradha himself remembered in his final years? The stone inscriptions, our most reliable sources, are curiously silent on the specific act of the throne's destruction. They do not condemn it, but they do not celebrate it directly either. They continue to praise his piety and his building projects. It is as if the chroniclers did not know how to categorize such an unprecedented event, so they focused on what they understood, his enduring legacy of faith and unification. For his immediate successors, the act presented a delicate problem. They could not openly criticize their illustrious forebear, yet they likely had no desire to repeat his radical gesture. The solution appears to have been a quiet strategic reinterpretation. The story was gradually woven into the fabric of legend, not as a story of a king destroying his power, but of a king so devout he offered his greatest worldly possession to the faith. It became a tale of supreme merit-making, a sacrifice that fortified the spiritual foundations of the kingdom for generations to come. In this way, a potentially destabilizing act of iconoclasm was sanitized and turned into a pillar of dynastic myth. Centuries later, as Bagan's golden age faded and its palaces crumbled to dust, the story took on new shades of meaning. In some folk tales, it morphed into a cautionary fable about the fleeting nature of worldly glory. In others, it solidified into the ultimate proof of Anuradha's saintly character. The moment the king transcended his royal station, Western historians encountering the tale much later often misread it entirely, sometimes attributing it to invasion or internal revolt, unable to comprehend a voluntary surrender of such a symbol. The true story became a confusing footnote, a puzzle without a clear solution, because its logic belonged to a world where spiritual capital outweighed political treasure. The legacy of the shattered throne, therefore, is not one of ruin, but of transformation. It proved that a symbol could be so powerful that its deliberate destruction could become an even more potent message. Anuradha did not weaken his kingdom by breaking his throne. He fundamentally redefined what strength meant. He exchanged a seat of command for a legacy of devotion, ensuring his name would be remembered not just for the empire he built, but for the profound price he was willing to pay for its soul. The echo of that choice resonates in the silent, majestic plains of Bagan to this day, where temples, not palaces, touch the sky. The true mystery of the shattered throne is not what happened, but why it resonates so deeply across centuries. We have walked through the evidence from the golden age of Bagan and the god King Anuradha upon his lion throne, to the startling archaeological proof of its careful, ritual deconstruction. We have weighed the theories from political desperation to personal crisis and found the most compelling answer in an act of supreme religious consecration, a king trading temporal authority for eternal merit. Yet a single definitive truth remains just out of reach, locked within the ancient mind of a ruler who left no personal diary, only monuments and fragments. And perhaps that is the point. Some historical puzzles are not meant to be solved completely, they are meant to be pondered. This story forces us to confront the very limits of our understanding, to acknowledge that a world where spiritual currency outweighs political treasure is almost foreign to us today. It challenges our modern assumptions about power, suggesting that its ultimate expression might not be in holding onto a symbol, but in deliberately letting it go. So what are we left with? A powerful king, a sacred throne, a deliberate act of destruction, and a spectrum of motives that range from madness to piety. The evidence strongly suggests a calculated, devout offering, a transfer of power from the palace to the pagoda, but the final interpretation, in many ways, is yours to make. Was Anurata a madman, a political revolutionary, or simply the most devout person in the room? What would drive you if you held absolute power to destroy its greatest symbol? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let this mystery live on in our collective curiosity. If you found this journey into the past compelling, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon. There are countless more enigmas waiting to be unraveled, and we would love for you to join us for the next one.